Today, I'm reviewing the Yanyin Canon Pro. This is a 7-driver IEM with 1 dynamic and 6 balanced armature drivers. Let's get it. What's cracking, audio fans? It's David here from Prime Audio Reviews. So yeah, we've got pretty big driver count in here. There it is, the Yanyin Canon Pro. Give you a closer look at those gorgeous shells there. So we've got glossy black finish on those 3D printed shells, resin shells, and on the face plates they are black with a scattering of sort of I think like metallic foil, colored metallic foil, purple and silver, and a bit of gold in there. Pretty nice, pretty stunning looking shells. By the way, the price of this IEM is $399, so we're looking at a sort of a mid-tier price there. They're about average in size, maybe a little bit large for people with really small ears, but for myself, I find these to be really comfortable to wear. Let's have a look at some of the accessories. First of all, you get this nice carrying case, and as well as that, you get a high quality single crystal copper cable, braided cable. It's really nice. I love copper cables. They have a certain feel to them, kind of a little heft to them, but they handle beautifully. The wire inside is lovely, soft and supple, and this is a really nice cable. It's available with either 2.5mm, 3.5mm, or 4.4mm balanced termination. For some reason I ended up with the 3.5mm termination. I ain't mad though. Lovely cable. This was my first experience with Yanyin as a brand, and I gotta tell you, I was not disappointed. So let's get into the good stuff. Let's talk about how these sound. I would say the Canon Pro here is somewhat of a contradiction. Like, it's got this smooth kind of warm tonality with a reasonably laid back presentation, yet at the same time it excels in resolution and it excels in detail retrieval. It's got this sound signature that is sort of balanced and full of character at the same time. The bass is elevated pretty heavily. It leans towards fun in terms of tuning, but it's grounded by a reasonably forward mid-range and a really well extended treble, and the result is a sound that's sort of impactful and full-bodied, yet at the same time it's articulate and resolving. Let's have a look at the graph. Look at that. It is, yeah, pretty smooth, isn't it? Nice and linear. Look at the smoothness in the treble. That is the part on the right side of the graph there. There's only one sort of dip after 10 kilohertz before it goes up again. So we've got excellent treble extension, but not only that, the treble is very smooth, but I'm jumping ahead because I want to start with the bass. But before I do that, actually, I need to talk about these tuning switches. There are 2 tuning switches on each shell, and technically that would give you 4 different sound profiles, but in reality there are really only 3 distinct sound profiles, and each one basically adjusts the quantity of bass. They leave each sound profile doesn't really change the mid-range, the upper mids and the treble. It only affects the lower frequencies. And the tuning that I sort of settled on was one switch up, the first switch up, and the second switch down, or UD in, abbreviated terms. And that's the sound that I'm going to describe here in this review. So let's talk bass, and I must say this has a pretty impressive bass. Any of the sound profiles, regardless of your switch settings, could appeal definitely to bass enthusiasts, but with both switches up, or in this configuration up down, I could see these satisfying even bass heads, because there's plenty of power, there's excellent sub bass depth, and there's plenty of rumble, nice physical, deep, powerful rumble, and enough impact to sort of make you sit up and take notice when it hits you in your brain. So bass notes are slightly rounded, which gives them a nice natural presentation, if not the fastest or most nimble. Still, the bass quality is definitely there. The driver holds up really well at high volumes, so you can turn up the volume, the bass increases, it gets fuller, and it doesn't start to distort. There is some slight bass bleeding into the lower mid-range, which adds warmth and richness, but it doesn't sound overdone. It doesn't muddy up the mid-range. It doesn't cause any blurring or smearing. I'm going to move that now. All right, mid-range is slightly saturated, so it's a kind of rich sounding mid-range. It doesn't have that ultra clarity that a lot of hi-fi IEMs go for, and that's, to be honest, that's what I was expecting from this unknown brand. A bit of bias in there, I guess, because I had pre-assumptions of what the sound signature would be like, but I was pleasantly surprised we didn't have that, you know, huge pinna gain, that really boosted forced clarity. Instead, what you get is slightly warmer than neutral mid-range, but never to the point of sounding colored or veiled. Male vocals are really nice and rich, yet they are still articulate. Female vocals are really radiant and captivating, but they never tip into that harshness or shoutiness. And given the powerful bass that you get here, you know, it would have been easy for the mids to feel overly warm and congested, but the quality and the extension of the treble help preserve that mid-range clarity and separation. So despite the forward nature of both the bass and the treble, the mids remain assertive enough so they can stand out and raise up out of the mix. And then there is the treble, and I think Yanyin really nailed the treble tuning here. The highs are really well extended, as you can see on the graph there, remarkably even with no jarring peaks or huge dips. And as a result, there's no harshness or dissonance in the treble, and no detail is lost there as well, most importantly. At the same time, the treble provides just enough lift to balance that quite hefty bass and bring clarity and air to the overall mix. It steers clear of sibilance, so there's no sharpness in the highs, at least to my ears, and it maintains a clean, natural timbre, which is obviously very important, that enhances the sound without drawing any unnecessary attention to itself. So the treble is slightly, you might say, forward, but very even, very smooth, and super detailed. And then when it comes to soundstage and technicalities, it's not a really expansive soundstage, but it does have a well-proportioned mix of width, depth, and height in the stage. Switching, you know, when you're in that DD configuration or both switches down, that opens up the perceived space without sacrificing much or any of that depth in the stage, but the treble does become slightly more aggressive as a result. And I forgot to mention, when the two switches are down, that does lower the quantity of the bass, not hugely, like it's still impactful, but quite significantly, and that does open up the mid-range. So if you're looking for a more high fidelity sound, then down will be the configuration for you. But apart from that, the instrument separation, the overall resolution are above average, even for a pricier IEM like this one. The imaging is solid, so it's good for gaming, it's good for positional cues in music, and, you know, supported by that strong resolution and clearly defined nice black space between instruments, which helps with the imaging and sort of giving you a bit of a taste of that 3D holographic staging. Right, so time for a couple of comparisons, and I wasn't really sure what to throw in here, but I've decided on, firstly, the Dita Project M, basically because it's roughly the same price. I don't have a whole bunch of IEMs in this price range. Well, none that came to mind anyway. I've probably forgotten a bunch that should have been included. This one only has two drivers, one dynamic driver and one balanced armature. It's got a more linear transition from the sub bass all the way up to the mid range. It's kind of almost a flat line all the way up until you start reaching into that presence region. which gives it a really unique forward presentation, and that's complemented by a rather energetic and somewhat bright treble response that is very detailed, but it's more aggressive in the highs compared to the Canon Pro's more natural rolled off treble. The Project M has a more upfront and direct presentation, which is, you know, it's kind of thrilling to listen to. It can get a little bit fatiguing over time, whereas I find the Canon Pro easier to listen to for longer periods of time. Project M's soundstage dimensions are a little bit smaller, but slightly more detailed, whereas the Canon Pro has a wider soundscape but with better layering and resolution. So although on non-congested tracks, I would say the Project M is slightly better at revealing micro details, but when, you know, during complex music, most music in general, the Canon Pro's resolution and that black background between instruments really does let the details come through. It's very detailed IEM. All right, let's move on. Next up is the Moondrop Blessing 3, which for some reason hasn't shown any of that yellowing that the Project M has. Probably they've refined their materials processing a little bit more, but the Blessing 3 has a warmer presentation compared to the Yanyin. It's characterized by a really full-bodied bass and lower mid-range. It's more V-shaped than the Canon Pro, meaning it's tilted up on the bass and at the treble end as well, which normally would mean it's slightly sort of recessed mids, but actually the lower mids are quite forward on the Blessing 3. So overall, the Blessing 3 has a darker tonality. Despite having more fullness and quantity in the bass though, the Blessing 3 doesn't have quite the same level of authority and power in the bass as the Canon Pro. Like, this is a pretty impressive bass. If you like to get a little bit of shock factor from, you know, sub bass rumbles and deep impactful bass hits, the Canon Pro is definitely an IM that you should consider. But getting back to this comparison, the Blessing 3's soundstage it has slightly more forward depth, but definitely less width. It's not as detailed or resolving overall as the Canon Pro. The Canon Pro has better overall resolution and better instrument separation. The Moondrop Blessing 3, I really like this. It didn't quite become as popular as I thought it would be. I really enjoy the sound of it, but it is somewhat warm, slightly colored in the mid-range, whereas the Canon Pro, well, let's just sum up the Canon Pro. I think this is a great IM, even despite its rather high $400 price. I think you are getting your money's worth with this. Very resolving, nice and detailed, incredible treble extension, but one that is very smooth throughout. You get 3 reasonably distinct sound profiles as well. Beautiful cable, lovely build. I'm impressed overall. I think it's a great IM, and if you are shopping for something, you know, you want to jump out of that $100 area and go up to the sort of next tier in terms of presentation and resolution and instrument separation, this is a good way to do it. So having said that, I'm going to wrap up the video here. Thanks for watching it. If you liked it, give it a thumbs up, PAR Family Audiophile style. And if you're not subscribed yet, hit that subscribe button right now. And until next time, I'll see you later.